Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Analytic Stories. I've got Jason Forrest with me from McKinsey Company. And I have to say, Jason, I'm really glad that you were able to join us because, guys, this man is busy. You got to listen to this. So aside from, his job stuff about being a data visualization specialist, a writer, and a designer, you might detect he lives in New York City by checking out his background. But more importantly, he's the director of interactive data visualization for McKinsey's COVID response center. So, I mean, he's right in the middle of everything that's going on, and he's been in this job for about a year. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that. If that wasn't enough, he's on the board of directors of the Data Visualization Society and was editor-in-chief of Nightingale, which is the journal of the Data Visualization Society. So, and he's got a lot going on. And what's really interesting to him is the intersection of culture and information design. And he's working on a book. So, I mean, and he has a family. So this guy we are very lucky to have Jason with us. And again, thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It is busy times these days. It's busy times, but it's lovely to be here and to get to talk to you again.
Excellent. All right. So we're just going to jump right in here. So you had shared one of your recent presentations you did on a topic called data empowerment, which honestly, I hadn't heard that term before. So it was really interesting to kind of dig in and hear some of your thoughts. And I think actually aligns pretty much with a lot of things that I'm talking to people about. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later. But what caught my attention more was actually at the end of the presentation, you had a phrase on the screen and it said, process gives you more signal, less noise. We've always heard that more signal, less noise kind of thing, but I actually thought that would have been a great opening to your talk. So can you say, what does that mean? And with respect to that idea, what's something you think that people who are listening in today could put into action, to work to change some of their issues around process?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm really glad that you picked up on that aspect of this particular talk. So what's good to keep in mind is that, the main part of my professional career is really in like user experience design, UX design, for more than a decade, built lots of projects, products for all different types of businesses, large and small, healthcare, insurance, kind of like enterprise organization, employee, people management, all kinds of crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And I remember at one point, one of the many awesome people I had a chance to work with, a product owner, was saying, you're really doing all this UX design just so that you can increase your strike rate, right? Just so that you don't have to go back to the beginning of like introducing a feature and realizing that people just don't want to adopt it, mm-hmm. right? So kind of a lot of my thinking in this particular presentation is really about the methodology that we go to from starting with just an idea or even a problem that needs to be communicated, and then eventually with someone digesting this. And so in UX design, there are, basically there's users. Those users have needs, and you go through the process of trying to identify those needs, and you come up with a hypothetical solution, which you test. You validate that test, and then, if people like it and it makes sense, then you build it, right? And that's just kind of this really elaborate, long, but fun UX methodology.
And it's been around a while.
Absolutely. And it's been part of the disruption that has kind of colored the entire landscape of digitization, right? But what's fascinating is data viz doesn't really have that process, mainly because it's kind of like a discipline or it's something that's applied to lots of different fields. And so, data visualization for some people is like a single data scientist crunching on numbers for months until they make a chart to kind of show the result. For some people, it's journalism where they're given 2 million documents to parse through and somehow illustrate and communicate that to, readers of a newspaper. It could also be, in a business setting, in like BI, traditional BI, you have some kind of metric and you have some kind of audience that comes in and needs to make a decision. And so what's interesting about data viz that you don't get in UX design, you're basically trying to get that person to do something, which is push a button, add an interest, add data to a product, press save, it goes to the database. Data visualization is not that. It's communication, right? So to a degree, it's all about trying to influence someone to do something or to give them the information they need to go about and create an actionable insight.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So that's a very long-winded way of saying that by considering a process, and I'm happy to talk about the processes I would like to consider it at least, by identifying the process, you collaborate with different people in a way so that you're going to make your information more digestible, more actionable, more relatable. And that's that signal to noise ratio.
Yeah. And I think this is why you and I have such a great connection, because way back, one of the first phrases that I came up with when I started my company was helping people become great communicators of data. Because I look at it also as a communications problem, right? But most people look at it as a technology problem or a data problem. And I'm like, those are just pieces that come in, right? The goal is to take that and put it together in a way that that communicates the data, like you said, in a way that lets people make those decisions, take action, not, make reports. I hate that word, make dashboards. To me, that when you say that, it's more about the data than what you're trying to achieve. Like you said, you're trying to get someone to push a button. Here, there isn't necessarily an end goal. I mean, sometimes there are if you're trying to communicate something specific, maybe like an infographic or something. But if you're really getting into the data analysis part, right, you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. You're like, well, here's what we have. We're now going to be those investigative journalists in a way, right? We got to go through this and figure out what's in there.
And I think there's a lot of like presumptions and just stereotypes about who does data viz and what it takes. And yes, you have these unicorns out there that are brilliant at basically data engineering, data science, data analysis. And then, having all these incredible design skills. But the truth is that you really rarely get that in the real world. Right. And it's a team sport. So what the other thing that data viz, and I think journalism to a degree, has not been very good at is really in validating and kind of collaboration with subject matter experts.
Yeah.
So here's an example. Again, a business has someone that they've hired to build a dashboard, right? And they say, okay, here's the data, here's the 6 things we want, build it. But it turns out that, down the hall could be a person that's been doing this, that's been collecting that data for 35 years, knows all the nuance behind the data, knows exactly, what that actually represents organizationally and knows basically where the bodies are buried, so to speak. And they almost never talk to each other. Right. And my point is you want to find all those people with the different skills to collaborate to get to the real meat. And there's one of the really interesting kind of aspects of this is that by getting a diversity of opinion in, it's actually going to make your work more inclusive. And I don't necessarily I don't mean that just from the sense of your colors are going to make sense for colorblind people. I mean that your work is going to have a much more broader, welcoming embrace of the different types of people involved in the collection and understanding of that data.
Yeah, because they all look at the same data in different ways. So if you think about your because you said you wanted to talk about this, so let's just do that for a couple more minutes.
So I think the easiest thing to think about is that there's basically 3 steps. There's the foundations of any data visualization needs to be data, right? So data literacy is kind of connected to data ethics, right? Because you need to understand what the data is. You need to understand what the bad parts are, like what the outliers are. Is it clean? Is it like in the format that you need it? Is it going to be in a pipeline that's going to be refreshed? And like, there's a lot to know about the technology of data, but also the ethics. Do you have the right sample size? Are you talking to the right people? Like, there's a whole world in data literacy, understanding the data. Then there's a whole world about taking what you know and finding other people that are applying that data towards insights or towards understanding, and that's this collaboration step with subject matter experts, and that's a lot. But then the third part of this step is really in doing design thinking exercises, because what I bring to the table is sophistication and communications graphically, right? A sophistication under organizing and information architecture so that people can quickly find what they need to find, process that, and then move on with their lives. All these other people have amazing skills that I do not have, but by looking at understanding your data literacy, your data ethics, understanding who your subject matter experts are, and then figuring out, applying design thinking exercises to iterate, prototype, and test your work, like that is the process.
This too is key, because like one of the things I talk about, and I'm not going to talk too much about it here, is this idea that
Absolutely, because they're fishing. I do it, right? You're fish. You're like, hey, let me see if I can, reel in a unicorn. And
expert in visualization and story. I'm like, so what are you really trying to do here? I said, this person is very rare. If
it's the whole tech thing. And I think that's one of the interesting things about my particular skill set, is that because I have a certain expertise in kind of UX and software development, and a certain expertise in basically art and design, that's why I love DataViz so much, is because I can kind of like apply all the different bits together and kind of try to glue them together in my own way. So
it is, yeah. I mean, it is rare, and you need other people. So speaking about working with other people, this is actually a perfect time to jump off, because you took on about a year ago this data visualization program for McKinsey, this COVID response center. And I know personally that's been real exciting. I think it's a super interesting role that you kind of got thrust into. And one of the things that you and I have talked about before is that you had to bring together all these subject matter experts, because you're not an expert on COVID, and there's different people and different messages you're trying to create in your program. And so I got to imagine that creates quite a bit of stress, because everybody's just stressed about COVID, and you probably had some kind of interesting meetings, and I can imagine what it's like to be in those. So can you comfortable, and how you were able to work through it?
Awesome. I'm going to walk around this one a little bit. So bear with me. I'm going to get to the point of your real question. So when we started, I think everybody spent a few weeks staring out the window trying to just figure out what the hell was going on.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Like there was really like a really nebulous few weeks, if not maybe even a few months for people. And I think it's like March 13th, Amanda McCulloch, who is now our executive director for the Data Visualization Society, as a data viz practitioner in the healthcare field, wrote this amazing article. It's our number one most popular article on Nightingale, basically saying, don't just throw COVID data into a BI tool and like share it with the world. You need to understand the nuance of this data, because healthcare data, it really means people's lives. Like there's an urgency to this crisis and the connection to data that you can't screw this up. You can't flood the world with a million maps.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And it was such an important read. And I was, because of Nightingale, I'm kind of connected to the whole thing. And so when they came to gauge my interest in participating in the COVID Response Center, that really loomed heavily in my mindset. Like, I don't really know anything about this data. Why would I start to visualize it? But as I started to understand the importance of it and what perspective that would be a little bit more unique for McKinsey is, we started to use this process that I had just been talking about. So at first it was just like developers making charts. And I was like, okay, so how do we find some subject matter experts? And that was literally like what happened on like the second day.
Right. And that's just notice that from the beginning.
Well, because, there are certain things that we have expertise in, like in the colors and the design and the arrangements and the charts and this form, this chart type, that chart type. And then we were working through all of those. And I was like, yeah, but we need someone that we can partner with to really make sense of this. And so it took us a while. And the things that I was uncomfortable with is people were making a lot of assumptions about not only the charts, but the implications of the data that we were not. Wow. I mean, and again, this is not even anything that went public. We were not in control of what the story we were presenting was at the very beginning, and so it took us a few.
What do you mean you weren't in control of the story?
There was data that was charted that we just didn't fully understand what it meant, and we had.
Okay.
And we had this one, there was one variable in the COVID data initially that we kept asking kind of loaded questions on, like, well, so what does this actually mean, right? So if this thing's red, that means it's bad in what way? And we never, ever got a good answer. And the good news is we were able to continue, and it turned out that a senior person had really liked this idea. And it turned out there was just a miscommunication, and so we got rid of it, right? Because... and that's one of the things that we were uncomfortable with, is not knowing if we were contributing to the conversation in a positive, informed way. And it's that foundation of knowing that this is relevant, important, and meaningful for our audience is one of the reasons why we've restructured the team in the way to collaborate with all these subject matters in the way we have.
Something is negative, you can just, in red, you just throw it away. I know that. But so what was it? What was kind of the key to bring all that together that people should be looking out for in their own environments to maybe not get into that situation or make it less onerous?
So, again, as a designer, I almost always know the parts that I feel of a design that I feel really confident in and that I can present, and the parts that I don't, right? It's like sometimes we're working on things and the language just doesn't make any sense, right? It's not just like mindless copy. It's not just lorem ipsum. It means something. And as a designer, it's our job to communicate that design, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that you start to probe onto those little gray areas or those little areas of doubt. And again, it's too high profile, too important for lives and livelihoods. Whenever there's that doubt, you've got to get a good answer. You've got to be able to justify your work.
But that's
honestly,
true everywhere.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not as, maybe life and death when you're talking about a whole area that is going to evolve, where people have to get comfortable probing, asking questions, not feeling like it's about them, but it's just about the process, right? Challenging,
Yeah, it's that you have an answer, right? And that, that answer makes sense. And, I think one of the things, not to sound too down on data science, because I certainly don't feel that way, but a lot of data scientists that I know often present all the data for someone to figure it out. And as I do this longer, I get older, I'm just like, no, no, we don't need all the data. Sometimes you need extra data for context, and it really helps people. Sometimes you're just throwing a bunch of stuff up
too much, right?
Yeah, you're hoping that's connecting dots. And
I think that's that's a software issue too, that lets people more easily get to it. I had this conversation with someone the other day, I think on one of the other interviews, where they were talking about that, and people just come in and it becomes a portal to the data. It's not even really a visualization. How to use SQL or whatever programming language I would need. So to me, if I can just hit a button now and get to all this massive amounts of data, right? So that to them, that's like a big win. We just couldn't even get to the data. Forget about all the other stuff, right? So anyway. Challenge, if you see, it's kind of like if you see something, say something. If you're a New Yorker, you know that one because you see it all the time. It's like, don't let it go by, because if you're picking up on it, it's probably going to come back later and make everything a lot harder for people.
And the other thing is that, like, you have to develop trust with the people around you, right? If you're gonna do it together, you have to grow together to be in control of the message. And so, if you raise your concern about something that just doesn't add up to you, they're going to see that, or they're going to say, I have that concern too. I was just off a call with a colleague, and I was like, I don't know if I believe this section. She was like, I think you're right. I don't think I believe that either, right? And so that's the other thing. It's just, pipe up. Hmm.
We actually have had like almost no snow, so I'm glad you were able to at least get that one in. But now, the snow probably means that all of the Yetis, the abominable snowmen that you would have seen, there's a lack of snow. They're probably were out there, but at some point they got to come out. They need food. There's stuff they got to do. So imagine you are skiing at some point and you happen to meet a magical Yeti. And they're going to, so it's like the unicorn, right? You had the unicorn before, now we have the Yeti.
Okay.
And they're going to grant you, they're magical, so they're going to grant you one wish. They're nice. So I want to talk, so keep that in mind. So I want to talk about that data empowerment idea that we touched on briefly. So when it comes to data empowerment, what one skill would you wish upon all of us data visualization practitioners, and why is it so important?
My wish is that, to the magical Yeti on the top of the mountain, is that these practitioners, whether they are doing data viz explicitly or not, can understand that collaboration is actually their job, and that
Interesting.
and that talking to people is a part of the work, and that that they're not alone, right? It's a team. It's a team effort, and the more you get out from behind the computer and talk to people, the better your work will be.
So how do you get people who may not naturally be comfortable with that? Or it's not that they don't like to talk, that they don't like people, but maybe they don't know how they're supposed to talk to them or what they're supposed to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing, is that this whole information empowerment concept, I've tried to keep it like so super high level, because there are tons of frameworks in design thinking and UX design and empirical research, in journalism. Like, there's tons and tons of frameworks out there. There's so many checklists for how to do a user interview. There are so many checklists on how to do an ideation session, to do some collaborative drawing. The problem is that people don't know to string the steps together. They just don't know what the next step is.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I say this, I was like, I don't really care what method you use. The point is to look at it as a series of events that need to take place. Right? Yeah. And so I talked to John Byrne Murdoch about this at the Financial Times. Of course, he's like a huge superstar that basically broke the whole COVID charts with a log scale for the Financial Times in London. And I asked him, I was like, how do you do research? Like, how do you test your charts? And I asked him that, and he didn't have a great answer initially. But then I followed up with him a few months later. And what he basically has done is, because it's a newspaper, they started asking for people's reactions on social media. And, thousands and thousands of people would write back.
Makes
saying,
sense. Sure.
And it was, and what he says, I have an article we can share a link in this, but basically,
thanks.
He said that there are scientists, there are engineers, there are developers, it's like psychologists, like everybody from all walks of life and across the spectrum have responded to him. And he was like, we've iterated and incorporated almost every bit of it. So.
Yeah, it's a huge resource to have that. I know that one of the things I did when I was thinking about, the process that I created for, I have this thing called Design to Act, which right, it kind of fits right in with what we're talking about. But one of the things I realized was that people need that structure. And I literally created, it's almost like Mad Libs. If people remember Mad Libs, it was like they'd give you a little bit and you fill in the blank. And as you're doing that, it creates, a goofy story. Now, we're not trying to do that, but it's literally like recipes. It's just, if you follow this and do these steps, you can get there, rather than, and then once they get comfortable with that, then they can have the flexibility, if they want, as comfortable as they are, to riff on it, right? Then they can make it their own. But giving them that little bit of a start where it's like, just do these steps this way, it'll get you pretty much what you want. And then you can take it in different directions once you kind of have it down. And I think, so like you're saying, having that picking some process, it doesn't necessarily matter which one it is, as long as you pick from the right kind of process, of course, right? They're all reasonable.
There is a process.
Well, right. Yeah.
Right. But you just acknowledge there's a process. And so, like, when I was writing this, and when I've been thinking about it, and I actually did have a conversation with a person that was in this same situation, which is that, that there are people in any types of organizations in business or in nonprofit or, what public sector or whatever, where they're just, they're sitting at a computer all day. They're basically, their job is to build dashboard after dashboard after dashboard. And they just, whether they don't know it, or they're not empowered, or they've been told not to do it, they just need to stand up and just ask somebody a question down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back when we had offices. But my point is that, reaching out to other people to get their perspective will only make your work better, more human, relatable.
Yeah,
all that.
I've seen that over and over again. So this is great. I'll kind of recap what we heard. I mean, that was a great start about, reaching out to people. I think you talked about, look into some things about design, right? You don't think you have to become a design expert, but if you start to at least understand that what that process might be like, and take elements of it, start working.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's been like, oh, you're the IT person, you're the Viz person, you're the business person, you're the this, right? Everybody was this thing. And now it's like you all kind of have to get together and, mingle much more than you ever have. And the harder part in some ways is we're not able to mingle as much, at least, next to each other. So, when we need it the most right now, when it's really accelerating, as everybody's realizing, how much more valuable data is, and how to having to want to use data as digitation, really skyrocketing because of what's been happening over the last year. So there's so many dynamics that I find it intriguing. So,
absolutely.
Any closing words?
Always happy to answer questions from anybody if they want to get in touch. I'm a very easy person to get in touch with. And, the other thing is it's just all about people. It's not about the data. It's not about the technology. It's just always about you as a person, your organization, and the people out there you're trying to communicate to. So I'll keep that in focus.
Contact information and some of the articles in his presentation that came up today, so you can all take a look at it. Thanks so much again. Good luck with everything. Thanks for all the great work that you're doing in all of your jobs. And let's close out, everybody. Thanks so much, Jason. Thanks so much. Hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you.
All right. So long.